This is the IBJ Podcast for the week of September 30th, 2019. I'm Mason King. I'm going to start today by trying to paint you a picture, which is appropriate because the setting for this week's interview happens to be an art classroom. We're in Providence Cristo Rey High School on Indianapolis's near west side. There are long strands of netting across the ceiling with a swarm of origami birds running across them. There are long tables spattered with paint and other substances, and it looks like students have been working on portraiture since there are several portraits on the walls, ranging from kind of cartoony to realistic. And the podcast today, we have a snapshot, if you will, of Fred Yeakey, who is Vice Principal of Culture and Mission. He's standing at the front of the classroom holding a pair of electric shears and cutting the hair of a student. Now, three other young men are seated in a semicircle around them in various stages of dismantling their uniforms. This is not a class. Nobody is getting graded. Yeakey and the students are just hanging out and talking about cars, about girls, about the soccer team, about people they know, and then about traumatic events that changed their lives. If this kind of sounds like a barbershop, that's the point. Yeakey started cutting students' hair about 10 years ago as a way to get to know them better, to help them feel more engaged in school, and to impart some fatherly wisdom when he sees an opening. This started when he worked at Arlington High School, and as he moved to different positions, the barbershop concept moved with him. For this week's podcast, we set up a microphone and then moved to the far side of the classroom to just listen. We'll start with a few minutes of their conversation, and then we'll speak with Mr. Yeakey about his mission to cut hair and to help shape lives.
Was there a one defining moment in your life that had you say, okay, this is where I'm at? Like, was it experience or was it just something that you just realized one day? What was it? What do you mean by that? Color. How old were you when that happened?
13, 14, 16 now.
What about you, Kevin? That's deep.
It was a lot for me. That's why I witnessed it was too many people get killed at a very young age. And then it was to where I got to a point where I felt like I was the only person who I could talk to. I was the only person who I had. When I felt that, when you feel like that, it's just hard on you. You can't trust. You feel like you can't trust your family. At that point, you can't trust nobody. You don't know what's real, what's fake. I finally met some people, or talked to some people, got me out of that one state, because I really realized what I was and what I could do.
Mr. Yeakey, thanks so much for making time for us.
Absolutely.
So my first question is, over 10 years that you've been doing this, in 4 different schools, what have been maybe like the 2 or 3 most common themes, the things that come up the most? I mean, and you've been at, like I said, different schools and under different circumstances, but do you feel like you always can count on something coming up?
Absolutely. What typically comes up in every school, I have students who really don't think that it's free. So when I offer a service that I voluntarily do, they often say, okay, what do I owe you for it? And that always is interesting, right? So once they find out that it's free, then I typically understand that there's more people that come to you. The other 2 things that often come up are, can you teach me how to do this? This could be a necktie. It could be, how do you pick out a suit to wear? Or that this can be something as general as, how do you approach a girl? So these common themes typically geared towards relationship are things that they want to know, but they don't know how to ask someone because that someone may not be present, or that someone may have a relationship where it's intimidating, or they don't want to be barked at. And the last thing that's pretty consistent is, what's the next steps from here, right? Thank you for cutting my hair. Then what? I need help on whatever that looks like. most of the time, the students know what they don't want to become. They just don't know how to get there. If that makes sense.
That's fascinating.
So these conversations,
They don't have like a sense of what that looks like, what it is they want to be.
right? So the challenge is that they know they don't want to have the same experiences of where they're at, and they want to go someplace different. But how do I get there? Right? So I have the wonderful opportunity of providing something that they use. So for instance, a great example of a conversation that I have is simple. Before you sit in the chair and I'm voluntarily giving you a haircut, I give you the mirror and you have to explain to me what you see. That way I can visualize it and give you a haircut. And a lot of the kids don't realize that you just gave your first vision statement of your life, because now you say, I want this haircut. I know what it looks like. And you look at yourself in the mirror and you see it, but you're not there yet. And that's a great example of how we can get into setting examples for your life. You know, these things just come out and the kids are like, wow, that does make sense. I say, yeah, this is what you can get just from a simple image. You have to see yourself there before you get there. So let me show you how to get there.
How do you do this without sounding too preachy? Without them saying,
Yeah,
Mr.
exactly.
Yeakey,
I
that
know.
just sounds like something an adult would say.
I'm telling you, hey, man, bro, I love the word preachy because a lot of that comes out of me unconsciously. But I think how I can get this to them where they can't say, you sound like my dad or my mom, or you may sound it. I think you first have to establish barriers of love and appreciation. And that's why I think it's so important that I don't want your money. I'm giving you something that you know you probably don't have money for. You feel good about your image. And once they know that I care and all I want you to do is pay attention, they keep coming back. Like, man, you don't have to do this. I know I want to. You staying late, don't you have a family? Yeah, but this is important to me. Or, aren't you tired? Aren't you hungry? Yeah, I got you some food. I got you some shirts. Somebody donate this. You got to get speaker in. They are overwhelmed by the amount of great acts of kindness that now I won them, so now they listen.
Is there a topic that's too hot to handle?
You know, I used to think that there was. So one of the things that we established, one of the first sessions, is that whatever goes on in the barbershop stays in the barbershop. And typically I try to keep the barbershop an intimate place where once the door is closed, if you're late, you can't come in. And the only people that other adults are in after we establish norms that we can invite them in. And I do that not to say that you can't, but they have to feel a level of intimacy where they can let down their guard and their image. So some of the topics that I thought were probably they didn't want to talk about, they probably not paying attention, are things that are affecting them without them even knowing it. So one of the topics that really became hot that they brought up was how to respond to police brutality. And they said, you know, I have a fear of them, not because I'm doing something wrong, but man, I keep seeing stuff on the news. I keep hearing people being afraid, and I see people running from the police, and then we get to ask why. And then they respond by, okay, how can this help? Well, let's talk about how you respond to authority, because that's what it is. So those topics just go down a rabbit hole, and before you know it, then I'll have someone come in who's probably in authority. So now they understand the interactions, because now you can visualize yourself from it.
Or explain to me how these kind of came into being.
Yeah,
I mean, yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, you know, I wish I can sit here and tell you, Mason, that I had a brilliant idea over a cup of coffee watching football, but that'd be a lie. I was at the time I was teaching through a program where I was inside of Arlington High School, and I had a group of young men that were engaged. I had a group of young men that loved talking about sports, but they constantly complained about how poor the school was. Now, I'm an Arlington High School alumni, proud product of IPS, but when I was there, I loved my school. But they hated it. They said it's not like it was when you were there, and there's nothing to do. So I said, okay, so what you want to do then? I mean, these kids complained about being in school, but then when school let out, they didn't want to leave school. And I thought that was interesting, so they want to be there. So one of the students said, you know what, you said you cut hair in college. Why don't you cut our hair after school? Let's just do something. So I went to the principal. They gave it okay, and 3 of them hung out and started cutting hair. And it just evolved organically to something that I would never have thought. You know what, Mason, I started to notice that the young men that came to my program, their retention rate came up. That means they kept coming to school. I started to notice that they didn't get any more behavioral referrals. And I noticed that every single one graduated. And I told my wife, I said, you know, baby, I think this is something that can help save lives. That was as a teacher. Then I became an administrator. I became the dean of students. Then I said, how about instead of suspending them, let's make after-school detention this barbershop program. Now it became a discipline referral. Now I'm a vice principal. Now this can affect the culture of the school. You give me the worst students, and I guarantee you, and it changed. My first year here at Providence, Cristo, the entire basketball team came. And let me tell you something, the entire basketball team were the leaders of the school. They started caring about how they acted. They started caring about their portraying. Now the culture of the school is changing. Now the culture is implemented into academics. So everywhere I go, it just evolved. But I started to notice that this can be something that academics and everything else can come out of.
So you found that it can make a difference. Why do you think it makes a difference?
You know what? I think it makes a difference for something simple that oftentimes as human beings we forget. We can be so engulfed by what we have to do that we forget that nothing can replace the time, effort, and energy of demonstration of acts of kindness. That's it. I mean, I wish, I can say that, this was something profound, but honestly, Mason, I was just doing something to keep the kids off the street, trying to keep them in school. I said, I have to do something. I have a gift. I have a passion. Why not do it? Why not work with what I'm doing? So I did that just to do something as small, because I wanted these young students of mine to experience life that I had. And I noticed that they really cared about something. And if I can probably meet something that they care about, I think I can help save a few.
My experience of high school was, everybody needed kind of a place to belong. Once you felt like you had a population in school,
Yeah.
you felt a lot more comfortable.
Absolutely.
And a place to be.
Absolutely.
And I don't know if you're choosing kids because maybe you feel like some of them are a little bit of a stray, or they need a little bit of that infrastructure. How do you choose?
That's a good question. So now I do it a couple of ways. I've learned over the years, after I demonstrate what this can be, to get teachers and administrators involved, because if they don't see the value of something, they won't support something. And honestly, if you're having issues with a certain young man, why won't you send them to me and let's talk about it? So I get the administrators and the teachers involved so they can understand that this is a part of the school. This is a part of a culture we're trying to build here. Then the second way I do it, I often see students that I may see in the hallway that may have some low self-esteem or who may be a leader, and I try to bring them involved and talk to them about what I'm doing. And thirdly, I just go after volunteer. I put up a sign, and I want people who want to be here. Typically, after the first year, I have to do a lot of the driving. But after that, you start to see sign-ups. You start to see a lot of people wanting to come. And then I go after the ones that maybe be shy, but may be intimidated about coming.
Do boys this age, I feel like I already know the answer to this question, but boys this age, they're a little shy about revealing themselves in front of women.
Yeah.
In front of at least, their female classmates.
Yeah, absolutely they are. And that's one reason why I keep it separate, because there is a level of letting down your guard and your macho-ish a little bit, and that way you can have an intimate feel. I became a father well before I became a father. And Mason, what I mean by that is that I begin to realize that for many of these people, not all, but many of them, I became a surrogate father because the questions that I was asking, I remember my dad teaching me. I remember him just taking time. And it really hit me when on Father's Day, I had a student come the day after and gave me a Father's Day card. And, I'm not an emotional guy, but, that touched me. And it's always the one you least expect.
How do you feel like this has changed you?
Man, it has. You know what? I felt like I answered a call that I didn't know that I was put on earth to do. And it changed me because it now has opened my mind up to an obligation that I have, because I really believe that if more young people had an opportunity of the Barbershop Male Mentoring Initiative, I'm convinced without a shadow of a doubt that many of these crimes that are being committed won't happen. Because one of the things that we stress is that it's not just about grooming the outward man, but it's also about grooming the man you can't see in the mirror that drives you. And they feel that man, but many of them don't know how to groom that man.
Okay, let's take a quick break to hear from our podcast sponsor, then we'll be back to talk with Mr. Yeakey.
The IBJ podcast is sponsored by Krieg DeVault, a trusted and dynamic law firm representing a wide variety of local, regional, and national clients. Committed to each other and to every client, Krieg DeVault prides itself on integrity, professionalism, respect, and excellence. Financial institutions, global manufacturers, national healthcare providers, and successful organizations of all sizes and market focus rely on Krieg DeVault to create innovative and successful business solutions. Connect today at www.kriegdevault.com.
All right, we're back with the IBJ podcast. You heard Fred Yeakey before the break, cutting hair and cutting to the chase with his students. He spoke to us on the same day in the Art Room Barbershop. Is this the kind of thing that other schools could just pick up and do? Or is it more driven by the person who is doing it, and maybe another school would have better luck with somebody who has an expertise in doing something else?
That's a two-part question. Yes, I think that this is something that any other school can do, but I think it's dangerous if you don't have the concept, if you don't have the curriculum, if you don't have the energy and the vision behind it. It can just be kids getting a haircut. Yeah, that works, but you'll miss the point that can really change your life. I think the other part of that is that anyone can do this. It's about mentoring through your gifts. It's about mentoring and you finding, what do I have that I can freely give that can become priceless to someone else? So my desire, Mason, is that with this publicity that this small act is getting, is that I don't want to become a monument where I'm looked at to be like, wow, you need Fred. Although I would gladly come, but I would more like this to create momentum where others can be piqued and they can say, you know, well, I know what the news, I know what the world is saying. I have something that I can instill into someone to make this next generation know that hope does exist. And I can give this freely without expecting anything back in return. I would much rather this become a movement.
Do you keep in contact with some of the boys that you had
I do.
Like a decade ago?
I do. You know, interestingly, they follow me on social media, and one of them reached out to me and said, I'm so happy that you're still doing this. This changed my life, and now I see that you're still keeping this going. Some I've brought in to be guest speakers before, and I tell you this interesting story. I was out with my family. We were at a birthday party in Avon, my wife, my two kids, and I see a grown man approach me holding a child that's 30 years old. And I had to look twice, and he said, hey, I just want to come and tell you I'm sorry and thank you. I had to look twice, and he was one of my first students that I started with when I was doing the after-school program. I was voluntarily cutting his hair and just trying to talk to him at 24 years old. He's 19. He said, you know what, everything you said was right, and I want to say I'm sorry because I gave you a hard time, but now that I realize you were really a great man, and I want to tell you thank you. He said, and I want to let you know I graduated from college. I have a son, and I manage a large food chain. And I just want to let you know that I heard you. When you get stuff like that, a grown man that looks like he's my age, and they say those things, it inspires you that what you're doing is for the greater good.
Was your wife there when that happened?
You know what? I wish she was. She walked away, and I had to tell her the story of it, you know, so it doesn't have the same thing. But what I do, Mason, it's guided by my faith. My faith in Christ really helps it, and it reminds me, and it humbles me, and then it lets me know that what you do, it's really bigger than you. And if Christ didn't do something for me, then I wouldn't be the same way.
Mr. Yeakey, thank you so much.
I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
My thanks again to Fred Yeakey. IBJ's Sam Quinn has a full profile of Mr. Yeakey in this week's edition of IBJ, including some interviews with his students. And there are a couple other stories I wanted to draw your attention to. Mickey Shuey reports that the CIB, the quasi-governmental agency that owns the city's major sports facilities, is facing scrutiny from industry experts who say the group isn't properly insured for catastrophic events. And Greg Andrews dives into the seismic change underway at Carmel-based Car Auction Services. The publicly traded firm is investing heavily in its digital business with the goal of becoming an industry leader in online auctions and in the use of data to strengthen and expand business relationships. You can check out all these stories in a copy of IBJ that you, of course, have delivered to your home or office or at IBJ.com. And remember, for full and unfettered access to all of IBJ's award-winning business content, just hit that subscribe button. Thanks again for making time for this week for the IBJ podcast, which is edited by Leslie Weidenbenner. I'm Mason King, and we'll be back again next week.